Good morning or afternoon, depending on which time zone you're in. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar Behind Doors Roundtable. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Glucuho Campus Safety and Crisis Management Committee. My name is Jeremy Alexander. I'm the technology coordinator for Glucuho, and I'm hosted at Eastern Illinois University, and I'll serve as the moderator for today's webinar. Before we begin the webinar, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items with you so that we can maximize your learning from the session. To ask questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and that will allow the presenters to see your questions and we'll respond to them as quickly as possible. But we want to make sure and ensure that we have enough time to cover all of the materials today. Should you experience any kind of technical difficulties, please type in a chat box and I'll work to help to resolve that issue with you. At the end of the session, recording of today's presentation will be available on the Glucuho website at glucuho.org under the Webinar Archives resource section for your future reference. We encourage you to share this resource with your colleagues who are unable to attend this morning. At this time, I'll hand it over to Kevin to get us started today. Kevin.
Jeremy, appreciate the introduction and your help today. My name is Kevin Krauskopf. I'm the chair of the Campus Safety and Crisis Management Committee, and we are very excited to have you with us here today. During winter meeting, we were brainstorming some good ideas for our committee, and we thought, sometimes you need to dust off some of those behind closed door scenarios, revisit them and revamp them. So we put together today's roundtable to share from our experiences some of the best practices that we've seen through our time in residence life. So I'm not alone here today. I have some other committee members with us. Get to the next slide. So first, we're going to start with some of our introductions for our time together today. And then I will have questions as the moderator, and we will go have our panelists share from their experience. And then we'll give you all as audience opportunity to talk or to ask us questions. And then we'll move to discussion. So if there's anything that you resonated with or things that you wanted to share with us or fellow coworkers in the region, there's an opportunity for you to share at the end. And then we'll close out with some final thoughts. So getting to our introductions, here is our lovely ensemble of panelists today. Like I said, my name is Kevin Krauskopf, pronouns are he, they, and I'm the Director of Housing and Residence Life at Elmhurst University. And I currently serve as the chair of the Campus Safety and Crisis Management Committee. Caitlin Kowalski, she will be joining us a little bit later on in the session. She had, a res life thing come up, so she'll be joining us. She works at the University of Dayton. And then I'll hand it over to Matt for his introduction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Zumwalt. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm currently an area coordinator at the University of Southern Indiana.
Benuel.
Hey, everyone. My name is Benuel Post. I also use he, him, his pronouns, and I am a complex director at Eastern Michigan University.
And yeah, we're all part of the Campus Safety and Crisis Management Committee. And we are going to jump into our first question. So Matt or Benuel, talk to us a little bit about how your behind closed doors scenarios / days are made up at your current institution. And if there are any variations that you've seen at other schools that you worked at that you think work well, or just variations that you can share with our attendees to kind of give them some ideas of how they can create or modify their behind closed door scenarios for the fall.
I'll go. So I'm at current institution for all of our training periods. Since I've been here, it's always been it's been during the pandemic. So I'm not as familiar as with our normal process, whatever that might be for BCDs. For the past 2 years, we've offered a provided each complex. We have 6 complexes on our campus with a packet of scenarios to go over. And we give them the option to do them in person or virtually, depending on their comfort level and that of the staff. And there's one in particular, the Title IX one, we would have them wait until after they had done the training to do that. Typically takes at least a few hours to go over them. My previous institution, it was the whole day in 2 separate groups, all in the same building. And they would go through the hall and there would be campus partners in each location to assist with debriefing for some of the scenarios.
My current institution, we have about 12 scenarios that make up our entirety of BCDs. They range from things such as alcohol and cannabis usage to mental health scenarios and like those RA conversations, those check-ins, whether it's academics or personal stuff, things of that nature. They take place for about half a day, either 1 or 2 days, depending on the training, where we just kind of rotate through different rooms and scenarios. We have both our full-time pro staff, and then we'll have like campus partners, like public safety counselors, those that are available to help debrief depending on the scenario. So like for marijuana and alcohol, we usually have public safety and or our sheriff's office, whereas some of the more mental health related ones will have counselors standing by for that as well.
Fantastic. Thank you for both for sharing. Something I forgot to share earlier in the introductions. I'm going to play moderator / panelist just to add some variety into some of the things that I've experienced as well, in addition to Matt and Benuel. So at the current institution that I'm at, we do behind closed doors. We have 7 scenarios. I'm at a smaller school, so we have to have to prioritize what we want to do in our behind closed doors, and think of what do we see most often, right? Based on the trends in the previous year, what do we see most often in the halls? What are the RAs most likely to see? So we always sit back and kind of think, what happened last year? How do we create these scenarios? Likely we use scenarios that happened the year previously, or some tricky ones that happened in previous years to write up the scenarios for our behind closed doors. We find that the realist stuff prepares our students the best. So with that, we have to be selective just because of how small our team is. Similar to what Matt was saying, we have a variety of things based on personal issues up into bias incidents, things that have happened on our campus that impact the entire campus. So it goes from individual small scenarios to that scenario to how do you think this would impact campus altogether? Because some scenarios start micro and move into a macro situation. So kind of thinking ahead of time of what do we do in the moment to be proactive in mitigating some of the issues that can become larger on campus. All right, moving to our next question. So for your behind closed doors on your campuses or other campuses that you've seen, who leads the debrief discussion afterward, and how long is that debrief? Matt, let's start with you.
So as I kind of alluded to earlier, after the scenario initially ends, we'll have the pro staff member that's in charge of the room, whether that's an area coordinator, assistant director, as well as our campus partners, whether that's public safety or counseling center. They kind of lead the immediate debrief and kind of see how we're feeling in the moment. But then we'll have area time at another point throughout training shortly after, where the area coordinator, such as myself, talks with their staff to see how they're feeling, answer any last minute questions, and kind of walk through some of those scenarios if they still have questions or unsure of how to proceed with one, especially because not everyone can go through each scenario. A lot of times you're just watching you're doing one and watching all the rest. So being able to get some of that immediate feedback on, I saw this happen, how does this work if this happens? Kind of walking through some of those what ifs, especially for our new folks.
And at my institution, so who leads the debrief, it varies. So in the previous 2 years, I supervised 2 graduate hall directors. And each year one's been a returner, one's been new. So I could more easily gauge which one would be most helpful for me to be present at. And my staffs are too big to do them all together. It just wouldn't be as productive. So this year I'll have to consider, because I have 2 brand new graduate hall directors, like the scheduling of both of those and which ones I can be present for. But I try to be present for all of them to debrief if needed. And then, but for the most part, outside of that, if I can't be there, the grad would debrief those conversations. And at my previous institution, we would have campus partners present in some of the spaces, like for mental health or Title IX, to assist in the debrief of those scenarios. And again, that all varies. Where I worked before was a much different type of institution than where I'm at now. So I think it varies depending on how easy it is to connect with your campus partners and how their staffing levels are.
Fantastic. Again, I mentioned earlier that I'm at a small campus, so a lot of our returner students debrief are behind closed doors. We have a training before behind closed doors to teach them how to walk through debriefing. There's a guide provided with questions that I prepare to make sure that they know how to handle that. Just because we have a lower number of professional staff on our campus, it's important for us to train the returners on how to facilitate behind closed doors. One thing that I always share with our student staff is to start the debrief with what went well, right? The RAs are always nervous, or whoever is in that space facilitating or responding to the situation. They're always nervous. They're kind of fumbling over their words. Some of them are really good and very confident, but a lot of times they're new to the position. So starting off with what are the things that went well? Like, let's start there. And then opening it up to the room to provide that student feedback and giving them those positive affirmations, I find is critical to help build their confidence into responding to situations. Sure, there's going to be blemishes in anybody who's responding for their first time, but you don't want to start with, well, you did this wrong, blah, 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 blah. You want to give them that information, but I found that starting off with what they did well and ending with a round of applause really goes a long way in making sure that RAs or whoever is responding to this situation is walking away confident. I know that Benuel and Matt were sharing about counselors. I know at other schools that I've been at, we've had counselors, and then we've also had Title IX staff for schools that facilitate Title IX scenarios. Having somebody from that office there has gone a really long way. So if that's something that you're facilitating during your behind closed doors, if your campus allows it, that's something to think about in addition to counselors, having Title IX staff there. All right, I will move on to the next question. All right, we've kind of got ahead of ourselves on this one, but is there anything else that you all want to add? Benuel, I'll start with you first.
In my previous experience, the only campus partners we've involved, like I already mentioned, Title IX office, the counseling center. We've also involved the student accessibility services for some things. Like these examples are all from my previous experience at a small private college, where we all like shared like the same office suite, so it's easier to connect with those individuals. Sometimes campus police partners. I could see potentially those are all the ones we've utilized most recently.
That's what I haven't heard before, the student accessibility services. So that's a good one to walk away with. Matt, before we get to you, Caitlin has joined us. So Caitlin, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, just a brief introduction of who you are, pronouns, and what school you work at.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin. I apologize, everyone, that I'm running a little behind. My name is Caitlin Kowalski. I am the operations manager for Housing and Residence Life at the University of Dayton. My pronouns are she, her, and hers.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll have you jump in on the next question so you have a moment to catch your breath. Matt, was there anything that you wanted to share in relation to this question?
Sure. So at my previous campus, in addition to having like counselors in some of the rooms, we also had some standing by like a central location in case any one scenario becomes too much for somebody. They can step out and have a conversation with someone just to check in, make sure that the RAs or student staff are okay, and also to get them some immediate support if that is needed.
Yeah, that's great. As I'm thinking things through, we've also, something we've integrated here the last couple of years, as COVID allows, is we've actually had our public safety officers come and join us for behind closed doors. So at this school, this was the first school that I was at where the public safety director asked to have their officer join us for like a medical transport, a marijuana search. So we actually have 2 officers that join us and participate, right? Like, you know, you all will be like, oh, we're calling public safety or whoever. They'll actually show up to the scene. So that's something that I thought was cool when I first came to Elmhurst, is that we integrate public safety into the response. They kind of get to work out the kinks there. All right. If you all have any other campus partners, drop it in the chat. We'll have an opportunity to share later on and be able to give you all voice to some of the pro tips that you have for folks that are joining today. Okay, so moving on to the next question. What scenario topics do you utilize during behind closed doors? And Caitlin, let's start with you for this question.
So I think, and I know we have somebody else from UD, Christina Smith here, but from my experience, for less serious situations, maybe alcohol violations, those sorts of things, we do those on a smaller scale in area. So alcohol violations, noise complaints, those sorts of things. And then for our more serious topics, so suicide ideation, mental health issues, those sorts of things, we'll do with our campus partners in a more formal setting.
Awesome. Matt, let's throw it over to you.
Yeah, so we have a lot of the same things that Caitlin just said: alcohol, noise, marijuana usage. We also have like roommate conflicts and like academic conversations, as well as just like those general check-in conversations that for some folks are really awkward at first. We try to focus a lot on what conversations the RAs are typically going to have. So whether it's, hey, haven't seen you around a whole bunch, wanted to check in and see what you're doing, or like, hey, your roommate said they wanted to talk, so we're gonna get the group together and have that discussion, those sorts of things. Then we have like our mental health scenarios, and those are usually a little bit more difficult for our staff to get through, so we make sure to save a bunch of time for some of those. But I want to say those are the main topics we deal with, are the things that they're really going to see while they're on rounds or their communities.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Anyone?
Most recently, again, these were some of these were virtual, some of them were like in larger spaces. Yeah, due to COVID, we didn't do maybe the more traditional method of like, you know, having like it within like a room and then going from room to room. Some of them are the more common topics you might go over during BCDs, so mental health, Title IX sexual misconduct, a party in a room, the roommate conflicts. The last year we did a roommate conflict specifically about, you know, religious differences, and we've also done them about you know, racist vandalism, like how to respond to that in a way that is supportive of students, but also is in line with you legal guidelines. And then if we wanted to by complex, we could add additional scenarios if we thought that would be helpful. For instance, in my area, like someone I think already mentioned, like cannabis is a relatively common concern, especially since it's legal in the state of Michigan, but it's still legal on campus since we're federally funded. So that's one that I will likely add to my areas just to drive it home some more about how to respond correctly.
Yeah, that's great. Just to add a little bit more about alcohol. So I found that having various types of alcohol situation helps. So Benuel had mentioned a party. So we have a party that includes alcohol and like drinking games. We make sure to have a transport. So if somebody has over-consumed alcohol and or some type of like injury, not necessarily alcohol related, but transport related, we always try to make sure to include a transport so students know what information to get from public safety and EMTs when they show up on campus, understanding to know where like students are going when they're being transported. Transports also happen here on campus related to mental health. So making sure that they know all the variations of what transports look like. And then for us specifically on our campus at Elmhurst, we are not a dry campus, and we allow our students that are 21 or older to drink on campus. So that gets really tricky for students and the RAs to understand like what are the policies. It's like if you have a roommate who's under 21, you can drink around them, but if anybody else is in the room that's under 21, you can't drink around them. So we always try to integrate a 21 and older situation because you don't have just free reign to drink on campus. If you're over 21, there are policies still. So we always want to integrate that into our BCDs so that the RAs know how to respond to that. Okay, so kind of going on the flip side of scenarios, are there scenarios that you all have excluded at your current campus or previous campuses from behind closed doors? And we'll start with you, Matt.
Sure. So this last year, we removed the Title IX BCD itself, but we didn't omit the training. We just preferred to have the Title IX office and their director meet with our staff and kind of walk them through the process that they need to be aware of and kind of how to have those conversations rather than put them through a BCD. We had like a hour-long training with that office themselves.
You?
I can't think of any that we've specifically removed. There have been some that based on like policy changes. Like this previous year, we had less COVID related policies in place than the year before. For example, in 2020, we had a scenario related to guest policy violations because we had no non-student guests were allowed, and it was much more restrictive than it ordinarily is. But we removed that this year because that policy was no longer in place. I can't think of any that we've excluded other than that, although like Matt mentioned, like depending on who can be present, I think it's worth considering changing the format of some if some of your campus partners who can process it aren't able to be there with them.
Yeah, that's a fabulous point, right? You want to keep those policies in mind of, if you've updated your handbook, you need to update your behind closed doors. So that's a fantastic point. Caitlin, do you have any situations that you've seen excluded from behind closed doors?
I don't have too much to add on this point. I don't think from my lens, there's too much that we exclude, but I think as Benuel said, there's things that we've had to adapt to and add depending with just the changing circumstances with the pandemic and everything else and policy changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, similar to some of what Matt was saying, I've worked at campuses where we don't have Title IX or mental health included in behind closed doors. students advocacy, pro-staff advocacy to remove them from behind closed doors. Just knowing that students might be triggered in how those situations may pan out in behind closed doors. Some people have even mentioned it's like unethical to kind of like role play some of those situations in how mental health or Title IX, how kind of far you're taking the scenario. So that's something that I've kind of adopted in my own philosophy is we have the trainings and we have the discussions, right? But we don't necessarily need to act it out. It's much different acting out a party than, a mental health situation or a Title IX situation. So that's something that I tried to be sensitive to based on some of the experiences that I've had at my previous institutions. And there's an argument to keep those in, right? So it will depend on the student body that you have, the professional staff that you have, and kind of what the philosophy is there. But those are some things that I've experienced similar to Matt. So Matt had mentioned that he has seen Title IX situations removed. So do you want to share a little bit more about how that's supplemented?
Sure. So as I kind of alluded to, we have like our Title IX office who will have staff present at a part of our training where we will go over kind of the difference between a Title IX report and a general IR, how to have some of those conversations and kind of what the process looks like. So when students are asking the RAs questions, if they're encountering this, kind of what that may look like. We also give the chance for the RAs to ask that staff a bunch of questions and kind of clear the air so there's a clear understanding. That we found to be fairly impactful just because they got to hear it from the office that all of these things are being taken care of through. Whereas like a general noise violation may go just through housing and students, Title IX has its own office that takes over everything and it leaves all of us and we don't really get to see all of that. So that's kind of how we supplemented that was we just chose to have that office give a lot more background and detail to kind of give the RAs more to visually work with than just a behind closed door scenario where it's either, yeah, you wrote the report, good job, which is still important, but seeing the why and the back end of that really made a lot of sense for our staff.
Yeah, definitely. We utilize similar practices where I'm at and where I've been previously. I think something that goes a long way when there are situations that are excluded that might be too sensitive is giving this not only the professional staff the opportunity to share what students should be doing, why they should be doing it, but also including their peers' voices, right? I think the students relate a lot to what some of the returners might have experienced. Obviously, they're not sharing details or people or, they're excluding all of the appropriate information. But I found that with those sensitive things, they relate to their peers in a different way when they've responded to something in the past. So this is something where, prior to a training, I might pull a returner aside and say, hey, would you be comfortable speaking to some of your experiences during this presentation to share a little bit of your wisdom and how you responded and how you managed your care after the scenario and how you managed some of the other students that were involved in the situation? Because it's not only the student that's directly impacted, but it's also the students that are responding that we have to think about as well. So that peer point, I think, is really, really important in my experience when it comes to some of those more sensitive things that might be excluded from behind closed doors. Okay, we're kind of switching it up a little bit. We've talked a lot about the content. So let's talk a little bit about the tone of behind closed doors training. So is it more strict? Is it a little bit more casual? How do the RAs show up and act things out? Are they, keeping things realistic, or are they being very creative and adding a lot of layers to the scenarios? I think I think we're with Caitlin. You're going to start us off with this question. Talk to me a little bit about kind of what's the tone that you've seen in behind closed doors.
Yeah, so I think I failed to mention earlier, coming at it from more of a operational kind of desk lens, that sort of thing. So not traditional RA staff, but our desk staff, our conference staff. So with that group, we have a little more room or levity to be a little more fun and tone, just because they still deal with serious situations, but there are situations that like losing a key or that sort of thing that we can kind of hyper exaggerate and create a story too. So depending on the scenario, we can be a little more creative, a little more fun, but there are certain situations that, whether it's alcohol, that sort of thing, that we will draw a little more serious tone to.
Great, thank you. Matt?
Yeah, so I would say the tone where I'm at currently for BCDs is kind of a mixture of strict and casual. Like we want the staff that's acting these out and that is confronting these to understand that these are important, but we also don't want it to be not a drag, but like just something that weighs them down the entire day. Like you're supposed to be able to work through the scenarios we give you, but it's the time to make mistakes. It's the time to make the goofs, and it's the time to ask those questions. So training for these is both like these are really important, and you are most likely going to face something from today in your RA careers, but also like have fun with it and make it your own, and you don't have to sound like a robot. Like be a person and be yourself. And with actors and just how we kind of portray that, we tell them to be as realistic as possible, but people throw their own flair in, and as long as it doesn't get out of hand, that's pretty much allowed where we're at right now.
Benjamin?
Yeah, I think like everyone's already touched on, like there's some that should be more serious, like and like we'll try to specify that to the actor participants beforehand to like be serious, like be reasonably realistic. But there's also some where like I think it's okay to like have more fun with it. Like for instance, if there's someone freaking out at the front desk, I feel it might be okay to like have some fun with that, depending on what the topic is, of course. But yeah, it's a situation where like it's kind of both depending on the situation. Overall.
Yeah, something I try to remind the RAs that I work with is like, this is not a hazing initiation, right? Sometimes the RAs, in a party role play or, a marijuana role play, something that they see as humorous might take it a little bit too far, right? Like you don't need to be standing on a dresser when somebody walks into the room. You don't need to, like have a joint in your mouth when the door is opened. So like, it's okay to have fun with it. It's okay to laugh with it. It's okay to laugh at like mistakes that happen, but all within an appropriate measure. This isn't an opportunity to just like while out during training and kind of let loose. So the importance of like having that discussion with returners has been really essential for me in prepping RAs for training. Is like, all right, let's sit down, let's talk about this. What are the boundaries, and having that up front. It doesn't need to be so strict, but we also have to have a learning moment for our new folks. So we all know mistakes are going to happen in behind closed doors. So what are some of the ways that you go about correcting mistakes when they happen in your scenarios? Benual, I think you're kicking us off on this question.
Yeah, so we have time set aside like after each scenario for like the other staff. And our staffs are varying in size, but and the staffs I work with, each of them are 10 RAs. To like give feedback on like what seemed to go well, what could have gone better, like and then I'm also myself and the graduate hall director are there to like give feedback as well. So for instance, like if someone responds or says something about a policy, I'm like, that's not correct. Like I'll point it out because that's the purpose of the exercise. I'll also, like, in briefing the behind closed doors, specify that, like, it's practice in a way, like it's okay if you make mistakes, like don't be offended when we give feedback. And then also overall in giving feedback, just try not to be a jerk because that's not necessary or helpful for students feeling comfortable with you for assistance.
Yeah, that's a good point. Every moment is a rapport building moment, so you don't want to be rude. Caitlin?
I think similar to Manuel, taking time after each situation and scenario to debrief what went well, what could have gone better, all of those good things. But also recognizing sometimes, at least I know on my end of things, particularly with the desks and things, there are policies and procedures that may change on the spot. And so sometimes something we went over during the training might change a week later, 2 weeks later. So taking the time to clearly communicate afterwards if something that we taught and went over in those types of scenarios is different, to make sure we're emailing, have a meeting, those sorts of things afterwards, and keeping the staff up to date.
Wonderful. Matt?
I think it really depends. So I don't know if I've said this or not, but all of our acting staff members that do all like the role play that they have to be confronted, all returning staff members. So at the end, similar to what I've heard already, like we have time for us to debrief and like ask questions. And a lot of times the returning actors will give advice based on what they've seen others do that day, and kind of just give some of that supplemental information if it's needed. Otherwise, a lot of the times it falls to either myself or the other debriefing parties to kind of help coax those conversations. Well, a lot of the times you'll have new staff members who are just viewing one of their coworkers like confronting the situation. Will add, well, I would have done this, or I think we could do this. And it's not so much like a you did this so wrong, but it's okay, how can we improve this? So we're not making the staff member feel like they've done everything they possibly could wrong, even if that's exactly what happened. But how do you take what we just did and how do we add to it? How do we grow from it? And how do we build on it to be better when this happens to you on rounds or after a long day of classes?
I have nothing else to add. We're going to move on to the next question. So, we had talked about some scenarios that might be excluded or included previously, and behind closed doors can be triggering at times. So, is there anything that you would share on how to support students that are triggered by a scenario? We'll start with Caitlin.
I think part of that is the relationship before. So knowing what scenarios might trigger someone so that you can ask them if they want to sit that one out, or make sure you're taking time afterwards to really talk with them and debrief after the fact. That's something that's going to impact them.
Yeah, that relationship's pretty critical in knowing what might be triggering for somebody. Matt?
I think a lot of it, sometimes students don't know how they're going to react to something that they're either viewing or confronting until they're faced with it. So having the option of like, if something becomes too much for you or you just need to step out, you are more than welcome to do so. Usually the caveat to that is if you choose to step out, whether it's situation reasons or just because you need to use the restroom, odds are someone's going to follow you out to check on you, whether that's an area coordinator, returning RA staff member who you're close with, the other member of like the debriefing party in the room. Someone is going to make sure that you're all right, but giving you that option of like, okay, you stepped in, didn't really know what it was, heard about it, started seeing it, and just not a thing you want to deal with right now. Like you have the opportunity to step out, and then we'll make sure you're all right. And if you're not, we'll get you some help. And then they're allowed to like stay outside of that room throughout that scenario, and then they'll move on with the group at the end.
Yeah, I would echo what Matt and Caitlin have said. If someone steps out, make sure to have a professional staff member follow up with them to see how they're doing. Like, Then also like if someone, whether it's before a scenario or during a scenario, like steps out, like in a way that's tactful and supportive, like ensuring that like they receive the information that that scenario was meant to communicate. I think as Kevin mentioned earlier, I mean, a lot of these topics should probably be covered in like another training. So and like if someone, I've never had someone like need to miss or ask to miss the whole like behind closed doors things. But if that were to happen, I would cross that bridge if I come to it. But if someone says they're going to be triggered by something, I try and respond in a way that's supportive and like not force them to do something that is uncomfortable for them in that way.
Yeah, I think we're going to skip this next question because I think you all answered it pretty thoroughly within the last one. But yeah, there's a lot of sensitive stuff that we need to acknowledge, and we need to humanize the process as we go through behind closed doors. So I'm going to skip this one since we already hit on it. So for the next question that I have is, we've been focusing a lot of our discussion on behind closed doors for the student staff lens, but do you all utilize behind closed doors for, you know, your professional staff, your entry-level staff, mid-level staff, graduate staff, or is it strictly just for the student staff? And Matt, we'll have you get started on this question.
In the traditional style of behind closed doors, I would say we really just reserve that for student staff. Certainly during like area coordinator training and just like pro staff training, we'll go through like, this happens, what do you do? But it's more of a discussion and less of like a traditional BCD. So we use some of the same tactics, but it's not like a mock scenario. It's just like we might read a scenario that's happened from a previous Maxient report the year before and kind of dissect how that occurred and like what you would do. But I think the traditional BCD we reserve for our student staff.
Benuel, how about you?
I've only ever done it with student staff. However, I do think there would be some value to doing it with grad staff and also, you know, full-time staff, because you know, policies and like best practices and whatnot are always changing. Like I can think of my own experience, some things that like maybe some practice with that would have been helpful for me. Because even regardless of how long we've been doing this and being on call and responding to things, like our response can always be enhanced. And I think the experiential aspect of it has some value for retention of how to respond.
Yeah, definitely. Caitlin, how about you?
I echo a lot of Matt's sentiments. I think from, again, my operational lens, we really use it with our undergraduate staff in terms of traditional kind of behind closed doors, walking through things, and with our grad and professional staff, more so walking through scenarios, not a traditional acting it out.
It sounds like I stand alone in this experience where as a graduate student and as a professional staff, I've gone through behind closed doors. Moments where I've seen it work really well for professional staff. I think, you know, traditionally we think, you know, an RA moves into a grad program and then moves into an entry-level professional. But I have had several peers who start in residence life as professionals. And I know in those moments it's helped significantly for them. So that would be one recommendation that I would have is, like, if you haven't had anybody who's been in residence life before, behind closed doors can go a really long way in getting people's feet wet and kind of working out some of the kinks, because as a professional level, you might be showing up to a pretty big scenario for your first situation. You know, something like a transport can be pretty overwhelming if you've never shown up to something like that. So That's some of my experience with behind closed doors at higher levels than just student staff. So kind of changing gears to the next question. Talk to me a little bit about your scenario script. How detailed is the script, and like what kind of guidance do you give to the actors as they go into a scene? So we'll start with Benuel.
Yeah, so it really depends on the scenario. For our scenarios in general, like we have a prompt that we read to the RA who's responding to the incident. And we also have like in the same document, like a description for the actors about like what they should do, like things they shouldn't do, things like that. And then going in, we just have like a setting up the scenario script that we read. And then we, and all these are about a paragraph, not super long. And then we have, you know, bullets of like tips for the actors and processing questions for afterwards. And then just so we remember to cover everything, we have like a list of bullets to make sure we go over for each scenario about like what to do and who will be called in that situation, things like that.
Sounds like you have a very thorough process over there. I like how you add in the debrief questions and the kind of steps to take afterward. Caitlin, do you have anything to include?
Not too much to add to Benuel. I think we have a similar, we don't have like a word for word script, but certain scenario points that we want to make sure folks who are acting hit, some questions to debrief afterwards, and just some points we want to make sure we reiterate during that debrief.
Matt, anything else you want to include?
Nothing to add.
Awesome. We are getting to our last couple of questions before we open it up for discussion. So the next one is around budget. So are there any funds or budget that your institutions or previous institutions use in relation to behind closed doors? And we're going to start with Caitlin on this question.
Yeah, from my perspective, no, we don't have any specific budget. We do have a training budget, but not a specific budget for behind closed doors. Typically, if we need something, if we're doing like a key scenario, that sort of thing, we'll just use what we have on hand.
Matt or Benuel, have you ever had funding or budgets utilized for behind closed doors?
Similar to what Caitlin said, like I know there's a training budget. I don't know that there's any item that strictly says BCDs. I know for props in the past and even this last year, it's really been like pro staff will donate, whether it's like some picture frames and things to make the room we're in seem more like home, or like when I was a grad, they would ask us, hey, if you have any alcohol bottles or cans that you're like finished with, we'll clean them out and bring them and we'll use them for BCDs. So there would be like 4 or 5 grads that would show up with the props for the scenarios that day, whether it's blankets and posters, alcohol bottles, what have you. And that was like our big contribution. BCDs, besides debrief, was the supplies were ours.
Besides printing, we've never spent money on BCDs. I could see maybe, although we already had this through the school, like if you needed to use for like virtual, some sort of like platform that could be helpful, that could be worth spending money on, but we've never needed to have a budget for behind closed doors.
Yeah, sounds like budget's pretty rare for behind closed doors. I've never experienced that either. But something that we are curious about to hear from each other and from anyone in the audience. Matt was alluding to some props. So talk to us a little bit about props that you utilize and or any confiscated items that you utilize as props. Matt, do you want to get us started on this one?
Yeah, sure. So as I kind of already answered, like a lot of the props, whether it's the stuff to make a blank room look more like somebody lives there, or like certain like alcohol, candles, stuff like that. Like candles, I think I used previously at my grad school were like confiscated. But for the most part, like it's all stuff that staff members have on hand, or there's like a supply closet with a bin that says BCD props. I've seen that before. But most everything is just either donated or borrowed for the event and then returned.
We've used confiscated alcohol containers. Obviously someone, usually a full-time staff member would be there because students can't have those if they're not of age. We borrowed drills for, in this case, it was a parent trying to hang up something with a drill, which wasn't permitted. Yeah, most things we just borrow if we need them, but most recently we haven't had a ton of props, so we've used.
I have nothing additional to add.
All right, before I shared, I forgot to share that this was the last question for our panelists. So let's give them virtually a round of applause for all of their fabulous contributions. So for the remainder of their time, we're gonna open it up for questions and then some discussion for the audience. So Jeremy, if you can help us out with any questions that are coming in through the chat. What questions does the audience have for us? And if you want to raise your hand and verbally speak, let us know. And again, Jeremy, if you can assist us with that. All right, I see some things coming into the chat. Let's see. No questions yet have come in, so don't be shy if you have any. One question came in from Michaela asking, how long do you normally set aside for each scenario? So each behind closed door scenario. Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
So we normally set aside like an afternoon for the entirety of it, and then it's broken down into like just time slots. So I think it's like somewhere between 8 and 13 minutes is like ideal for what we have for our schedule. I've seen at different institutions as little as like 10 minutes for the entirety from start to finish, including debrief. Otherwise, I've also seen up to 15 to 20. I know when I was a grad, we broke it up into 2 days, one that was like lower level, like alcohol and noise and like roommate conflicts, and then like medium to high level, which was more of your Title IX, your mental health, homesickness, stuff that would probably take longer to debrief and like handle as an RA. We had longer times for. If your schedule allows, that 2-day system can work. I've seen it, but yeah, somewhere between 8 and 15 minutes is pretty typical for like a rotation day.
Any other variations from the other panelists?
Ours has been similar. My previous institution, the other place I've done it in person, we would have, several hours, and then I forget the exact time frame, but I think it would estimate which one would take the longest and just have it each one go that long, and then instruct groups to wait outside the next room until the other group left. And then we would have someone in each area keeping track of time so that it didn't go too long.
Yeah, it sounds like Benuel, you were hitting on this point. It sounds like as long as they're all consistent amount of time, that's pretty essential. Is like thinking about the longest one, and then making sure like students move from room to room. I've been at schools where they have like an intercom system where it's like end, and then there are other ones where it's like you're sticking to a timetable, and the person facilitating the room might go knock on the other door to say, hey, we need this next group, let's keep this moving along. One thing that I've also included to make sure that you do have a buffer for that time is to have at least one break for each room, so it gives the students time to kind of like catch up in a sense. So that's one thing that I've found helpful is no matter what time you have, giving the room, each room at least one break so that there is a buffer. There's another question that came into the chat from Lauren that says, have you ever used outside people as actors for BCDs? For example, they've been considering orientation leaders or student org or students from student orgs. And if we've had any success with using outside actors. Throw it over to anybody on the panel to speak to that.
So I've never experienced using outside organizations or folks for this, usually with having returning RAs and pro staff in the room, because they're the ones that have seen this or dealt with this before. So kind of having the actors know kind of how they would interpret the situation, how they would react, helps with debrief. I've never seen an outside organization help with BCDs. That doesn't mean it can't be done.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Benuels.
I was just gonna say sometimes we've had people, like we needed volunteers to assist, help with it. For instance, we have summer staff that may not be like working in the fall. They could potentially assist if they're interested in, but mostly we use like returning staff. We're full-time staff in the department to do the acting.
Something that I've done here at Elmhurst is our public safety director asked for the public safety officers to join in responding to the situation. So not necessarily acting, but a good opportunity for our public safety officers to build some rapport with RAs as they're responding to the situation. So, but it sounds like there's plenty of outside organizations that are helping with like debrief and having those rapport building opportunities, not only in front of the students in a training presentation, but also in the room, talking things through and assisting them with their response. Good questions. Somebody from the audience, Michaela, shared that their institution has not used outside actors, but did a session in spring training with pro staff acting so that RAs can get an accurate depiction of the situation and how they should cooperate as an RA. That's a really fabulous point. Kind of earlier to some of what I was saying around like this isn't a hazing initiation, so if it may not be appropriate for the student staff to act out, that's a good strategy to utilize to have the professional staff kind of bring some of their acting skills to make it a little bit more realistic. I love that. So we're almost at the hour. Is there any other questions that you all wanted to ask before we wrap up? All right, I'm not seeing any coming in. And with that, we are gonna close out today. I really appreciate everybody attending this session. Like Jeremy said, it will be shared on the Klukuho website. Feel free to email me if you have any questions or if you're unable to find it. Yeah, you can reach me at kevin.kroskoff@klukuho.org. So have a great day and thank you all for joining us. And thanks again, panelists, for all of your insights. Appreciate it.